Hi, and welcome to round 2 of Vote 2014 Santa Monica Council Candidates Live. I'm Sandy Jacobson. Election day is almost here, and tonight's forum will give you an excellent opportunity to size up all 14 of the candidates for 3 seats on the City Council. Here's how the show works. The candidates have been randomly divided into small groups, and each will have the chance to briefly express his or her views on a range of topics. Then during a roundtable discussion, the candidates will be able to interact with each other. In order to give the candidates enough time to really expand on their answers and for you to get to know them better, we've split the field of 14 into 4 groups, and each group will be joining us for about half an hour, all live tonight. All candidates have signed a speaker's agreement confirming that they agree to adhere to program guidelines and ground rules, which include maintaining an atmosphere of respect and tolerance throughout the forum, and an understanding that standards of civility and courtesy will be strictly enforced by the moderator, being me. The League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund coordinated the gathering of questions and invited a cross-section of community leaders who represent a range of community interests to come to City TV's Studio 16 to ask their questions. The League has curated a selection of these questions for the candidates to answer for you tonight. And in a new twist, we're inviting you to join in on the discussion tonight by participating in our live viewer polls. For each segment, we're going to ask you the same question as the candidates, and you'll tell us your answer to the same question. You can vote in the poll via text or email, so get your cell phones and computers ready. And if you miss any of the groups, this show repeats on City TV, Cable Channel 16, Cable Channel 99, and of course, smvote.org. We wish to thank the community leaders who took the time to come into our studio to tape their thoughtful and important questions. And as always, we thank the candidates for their participation. Now let me introduce the candidates for segment 1 of Council Candidates Live. In our first group, we have Nick Bowles, Zoe Montaner, and Kevin McKeown. We'll start with opening statements. Nick, will you go first?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy. My name is Nick Bowles. I'm currently running for Santa Monica City Council. I think we need a change of pace in our leadership and our current elected leadership, and I'm here to build a bridge across our generations to make sure that we can all move forward together, to make sure that tomorrow we have a place for our next generation of leaders, for our youth, and a city that we can afford to live in. So those are my top priorities, as well as improving transportation. I'm currently endorsed by resident, 3-time mayor, and current assembly member Richard Bloom, and I would love your vote November 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Zoe Montaner, please.
Thank you, Sandy. I decided to run for City Council after the interviews of Santa Monica for Renters' Rights before their convention. I saw that Saturday that no voice on the candidates represented mine or that of many, many Santa Monicans that I've been in contact with through my work as Compassionate Santa Monica founder. I'm afraid in this election they will have no voice if you forget that there is important to have a progressive voice that represents diversity not only in race, but gender and age. I represent that voice. I'm the trifecta candidate. And when you vote for me, you're bringing to City Council a voice that has no strings attached, with no political party and no special interest. I'm not receiving no money from special interest. And
thank you, Zoe. Kevin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. It's good to be here again. I'm Kevin McKeown, and as your council member, I've always represented residents, not special interests. I've protected renters against evictions and all of us against displacement and overdevelopment. I voted against the Hines Project, and I worked on the referendum that finally stopped it. In my time on the council, I've never taken developer donations or any corporate contributions. I'm supported by residents and by Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights. I'm endorsed by the Santa Monica Coalition for a Livable City, by Residocracy. I'm endorsed by our police and firefighters, the Los Angeles County Democratic Party, the Coalition of Santa Monica City Employees, and the Sierra Club. I'm Kevin McKeown. I'd like to keep working for you for another 4 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick and Zoe and Kevin. Our questions have been gathered from community leaders and videotaped in advance. Let's hear from our first community leader.
My name is Tricia Crane. I'm Vice Chair of Northeast Neighbors Neighborhood Association. And my question is, has the strengthening of rent control laws in Santa Monica had the unintended consequence of increasing the ellising of properties and tenant harassment?
Thank you. Zoe, will you give us our first answer,
Can you
please?
repeat the question again?
I can. Hold on one second. I will read it to you. Has the strengthening of rent control laws in Santa Monica had the unintended consequence of increasing the ellising of properties and tenant harassment?
I don't think so. In my personal experience, I have experienced tenant harassment 6 times, and I have filed tenant harassment complaints with the city attorney office, and they have been closed without investigating. I brought this to the attention of our current city council and our former city council. I brought this to the attention of the mayor, and nothing has been done. I brought this to the attention of the city attorney's office, and nothing has been done. So I don't see the correlation of those 2 items.
Thank you. Kevin, what would be your response?
I'd have to say absolutely not. In fact, the Ellis Act is a state law, and we had to react to it because it meant that people who were renting buildings could go out of the business. That was a big problem for many Santa Monica renters who lost their homes. Then we had the Costa-Hawkins Act, which came in the 90s, which said that when an apartment was vacated, the rent could go to market rate. What we've done with our tenant harassment laws is protect people in their homes. Housing stability is the goal here, to make sure that people who are renters can truly be part of our community and feel part of the community and commit themselves to Santa Monica just like a homeowner can. So we think have done a good job protecting renters.
Thank you, Kevin. Nick, please.
Yeah, I don't believe so either. However, I do think that ellising has become a huge problem, especially here in Santa Monica, and that gives all the more agency to the city government to make sure that we have enough housing funds to purchase buildings and make sure that we can take that property to protect tenants, as I believe 60% of our housing funds are used for that very purpose, to purchase those buildings and protect our tenants from being ellised and kicked out of their property.
All right, we're going to go on to the round table, but before we do, Kevin, can I ask you to explain what Ellis, because I'm not sure that every viewer understands.
Sure, it was part of the question that was asked. The Ellis Act was a state law passed in the 80s that said that a property owner could go out of the rental business. Santa Monica's rent control law originally was not intended to allow that to happen. So it totally changed the equation and has meant that people got evicted.
How would the landlord go out of the landlord business, out of the apartment building business?
They have to declare their intent to do so. They have to file it with the Rent Control Board. And some of the protections that I've put in place include a period of time during which the tenant will get to stay. And if it's a senior citizen or somebody with a disability, that can be up to a year.
And then the landlord has to close the building.
The landlord has to close the entire building and evict everybody and go out of the rental business.
All right. So you're all in agreement that the strengthening of the rent control laws hasn't forced more ellising. Mm-hmm. You're all in agreement on that?
Has enforced? No, it has protected, I think, people from the effects of ellising. We can't stop ellising.
I don't agree, because I personally have been victimized by it. And I'm actually currently dealing with a landlord that has tried to evict me. So I'm the only candidate that has.
Well, when you say tried to evict you, do you mean that they're going to close their building?
She filed first originally an unlawful detainer, and then she dismissed it because she had no grounds for it. And now she put a 30 days notice to vacate, which is illegal as well. And it distracts me of my peace and quiet in my home. And the city attorney's office received a complaint and is doing nothing. And the rent control, nothing. And the city attorney and the city council, nothing.
I think I think that one of the hardest hit by these strengthened rent controls are the smaller apartment building owners, some of which only have 3 to 4 units. And I know I've spoken to a couple personally, and they say that it becomes like you have a neighbor from the worst possible neighbor you could think of, and there's no possible way to get rid of them. So sometimes the smaller
Neighbor or tenant.
but that's because a lot of people end up living in those smaller units to protect themselves from being subject to that rent control and just being able to pay the bills. So there is pressure, but particularly on smaller units, I wouldn't say on the larger units.
Sandy, let me move us towards solutions.
Please.
You both are young, at least you're younger than I am, and I've lived here most of my life. Thanks to rent control, I've had the stability to remain in the same place for the last 38 years. What you need and what new people coming to Santa Monica need is the same kind of stability in your housing. And what that's going to require is more deed-restricted affordable housing, because unlike rent-controlled units, those are limited in rent. The rent doesn't go up for up to 55 years.
You mean there's no decontrol on something
There's no
like that?
decontrol on a deed-restricted unit.
I think that the problem with affordable housing is that a lot of our middle class just does not qualify for that affordable housing, and there's not enough of that affordable housing. So what I think that we need is more housing, and particularly retargeting the affordable housing to hit our middle class so that we're not squeezed out when market rate goes up every year.
And adding to that, affordable housing that is truly affordable housing, because I rented an apartment at 829 Broadway that is part of the NMS portfolio, and it's affordable housing, but was $1,700 for less than 300 square feet. That's not affordable
That
housing.
doesn't sound affordable.
What we do have is affordable housing right now under current city policy. We cover everybody from 30% of median income all the way up to 100%. Median income is that middle point of incomes in the county.
All right. Well, I think you guys handled that very well. Thank you. We've heard the candidates answer our first question about rent control, and now we'd like to hear from you. So this is the fun part. To participate, text your answer to 22333. Text the answer that you see in the parentheses on the screen. Or the easiest way to vote is go to pollev.com/citytv. You'll see each poll when it's open and just click to send in your vote. So now tell us your answer to, has the strengthening of rent control laws in Santa Monica had the unintended consequence of increasing the ellising of properties and tenant harassment? If your answer is yes, a lot, then you're going to vote yes, SM. If it's yes, somewhat, you're going to vote yes, SM. If you see there's no change, then no change, SM. If it's no, no, SM. And if you're in that don't know, it's DK, SM. We'll be back with the results before the end of this segment to see how your answers square with the answers of the candidates. And now on to our next question, which is about pedestrian safety.
My name is Cynthia Rose, and I'm the director of Santa Monica Spoke. My question is, the residents of Santa Monica have demonstrated that pedestrian safety is a priority. The pedestrian action plan is nearing completion and should soon come to council. What will you do to make sure it is robust and supports the community's desire for safer, more equitable pedestrian facilities throughout the city, as well as a commitment to safer streets for our most vulnerable users, people walking?
Kevin, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Sure. Cynthia mentioned the pedestrian action plan, and I will support that plan just as I did the bicycle plan. I am basically an advocate for complete streets, which means streets that no longer are focused on motor vehicles alone, but they're shared and shared safely by people using different modes of transportation. Now, when we did the bike action plan, I was able to help pass what's called MANGO, the Michigan Avenue Neighborhood Greenway, by compromising with the neighborhood and getting that plan to move forward. I'll do the same thing politically with the pedestrian action plan. That's very important to me.
Thank you, Kevin. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, I think that pedestrian safety is keystone, especially in such a walkable city as Santa Monica. And living off 21st and Wilshire, I've experienced someone who was killed right off of Wilshire just because of poorly lit up crosswalks. One of the big things that we really need to focus on is enforcement of this pedestrian code of conduct, especially with the Expo line coming in. We're going to have large influxes of new people who are walking, and making sure that they follow correct conduct to not only reduce traffic, but also make sure that they stay safe and that our residents stay safe is completely number one priority.
Thank you, Nick. Zoe, please.
Well, I echo both of candidates. I think also the police is key in the success of what Nick just voiced. So we need a police system that is accountable for the enforcement of this. I come with an idea of preparing some Santa Monica City labs where we put this type of experiments to work before we bring them to City Council one day a week. And we can start doing experiments and see how it works before we take action.
Okay. So I'm not clear on what the pedestrian action plan is. Kevin, you're nodding.
Yes, I am, because I've been working on it. When you're on foot in Santa Monica or anyplace else, you are the most vulnerable of those out there compared to bicyclists or to motor vehicles. So I would hope that motorists or bicyclists would yield to pedestrians, but pedestrians also need certain protections in terms of crosswalks, etc., and also to be aware, and I try to be aware when I'm walking, that maybe the sun is behind me, maybe there's some reason why a motorist or a bicyclist can't see me. So I think we all have to take responsibility for how we act as we either drive, bike, or walk, and the pedestrian action plan will move us toward that kind of community consensus on how we treat each other with respect on the street.
Nick, you're...
Yeah, I was going to say that, code of conduct is super important, but we also have to look at making sure that we invest in that infrastructure to ensure the safety of our pedestrians, whether those are crosswalks, those are lighting our intersections better, making sure that pedestrians are seen and respected and not just sped by. Because like I said, I live right off Wilshire, and it can be very dangerous just walking the street, even right in daylight.
I think I respectfully disagree with Kevin that the most vulnerable are actually the cyclists, because you are in a vehicle and you are exposed to the attack of a car. And because I experienced an accident and a poorly kept bicycle lane, I can tell you that I feel most vulnerable in a bicycle than walking. I feel very safe walking. But I cannot stress enough the role of the police in this enforcement of the rules of conduct that we need to have in place.
And of course, it is part of the California Vehicle Code, isn't it? I mean, that pedestrians have the right of way even when they're not right.
That's correct.
Yeah. So do we feel we've expressed our views on this? All right. So our poll is still open, and we're asking you to chime in with your vote on the question you see on the screen. Remember, text your answer to 22333. Send the answer that you see in the parentheses. Or go to PollEV, so that's POLLEV.com/CityTV to vote the easiest way, which is online. Now it's time for our next question, which has to do with affordable shopping.
My name is Jackie Martin, and I'm with Unite Here Local 11. Okay. Working families like mine can afford to shop at the expensive clothing stores in the mall or at the promenade. I have had to drive to neighboring cities to go school clothing shopping for my children. What would you do as a city council member to encourage more family-friendly retail in some of our mixed-use areas?
Okay. Nick, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I think first off we look at local businesses. Local businesses create strong local economies. So making sure that we bring in local businesses to provide these at not too expensive of a rate. I know currently we have TJ Maxx in the downtown area, which does provide affordable clothing for children. However, we should look at expanding our options to possible different outlets that would allow for something for the middle class or lower middle class to be able to afford to shop at without leaving to have to go to our neighboring Culver City or West Los Angeles.
Thank you. Zoe.
I presented at City Council meeting a couple months ago the pop-up stores that I'm planning to do in 2015, starting in January. And the pop-up stores are going to be a joint venture with established chain stores, where they're going to have in different parts of the city a store for 1 month. And all the sales are going to go to charity, but also the merchandise that is going to be sold is going to be affordable.
Kevin?
We've struggled for years to retain the affordable shopping we have, often stores owned by local people. What we've seen, though, and the Promenade is a good example, is that the landlords of the buildings will raise the rent to whatever they think they can get, and that often prices out the affordable shopping. We do not have business rent control. We talked about stability with residential rent control. We don't have it for business. I think that the answer in the long term is going to be, as the city makes agreements for developments of mixed-use projects, to require that a certain amount of affordability be written into that contract. I just did that actually downtown with an affordable supermarket that I'll make sure will take food stamps and EBT.
Thank you. Zoe, you talk about pop-up shops.
Yes.
But that isn't something that necessarily that people who are looking for, let's say, children's clothes or some other kind of
Yes.
fashion,
Yes.
but not very expensive. They
Yes.
can't count on pop-ups, can they? I mean,
Well, we're going
just
to have
their
a
nature.
Yes, we're going to curate them. Each month we're going to have a different one with a different theme, and we're going to have art, and we're going to have shopping, and we're going to have food and them.
Okay.
So it's a way to build community, but also a way to express the diversity that we have in the city.
You know, what, Nick?
I was just going to, I'd be interested to hear some of the other candidates here's thoughts on possibly putting a city target or something like that into an area of Santa Monica, specifically maybe at one of our opportunity zones, to ensure that, you know, our lower middle class or lower income residents have a place to shop without having to leave the city.
I'd be happy to see a city target. There was one proposal years ago, but it was in the wrong place. It was in a place that would have tied up the traffic for all of downtown. People would have hated what would have happened. I'd be happy to see that happen. And part of the equation, the context, is not just shopping, but for union members like the one who asked us the question, it's also affordable housing and a living wage. All those things go together.
But there's traffic and then there's parking.
Exactly.
Because I remember when that was going to go in, it was going to go where Henshey's was.
It was a block away.
Okay.
Yes.
And that would have, like you said, that really would have tied it up. But where are there areas where there are better places, you know, not quite so city center?
I think that we should look for specifically zones along the incoming Expo line, whether it is at that Dune Bergamot station, whether it is closer to where the Santa Monica Community College is, or something where we can have it very close to public transit, whether it's a big blue bus line or whether it's along the Expo line.
I go to the Target on Westwood and I take the bus, the big blue bus, and it leaves me right there in the corner. So for now, I'm satisfied that I can leave town. Sometimes I like to leave Santa Monica. I live here all time. So yes, and if we have to have it, then it has to be in one of the sites that Nick mentioned.
I think we have to look at the cumulative impacts of all the different things we allow to happen in the city. And for this kind of shopping, which we know will generate traffic, and it'll be vehicle traffic because people will be buying things they can't necessarily walk back
take
home
on the
with,
bus, right.
we have to carefully choose a part of the town that isn't already tied up with traffic. We can't make the problems we already have any worse.
But all three of you would agree that it is a priority. It's something we should shoot for, desirable.
I have other priorities before a Target store,
Well.
to tell you the truth.
Okay.
My priority is affordable shopping,
Affordable.
not
Doesn't
any,
have to be
not
Target.
any one
Yeah.
brand.
Yeah.
Any type of affordable
All
housing.
right. As a quick reminder, we're doing live text polling tonight as part of our program and inviting you to weigh in your opinion on questions we're asking the candidates. If you want to vote via text, you're sending us the info in the parentheses to 22333 or vote online at pollev.com/citytv. So let's see who's up next for our last of the questions for the candidates.
I'm Carl Hansen, Director of Government Affairs for the Santa Monica Chamber of Commerce. How would you help educate and engage younger members of our workforce and younger residents in our civic engagement process?
Okay, Zoe, how would you respond to that?
Well, I have 3 organizations already in place that have registered DBAs. One of them is Compassionate Santa Monica. The other one is City Sane Zoe, and the other one is City Zen Zoe. And I want to build a partnership with Cross Campus where we're going to do a job fair to hit the millennial generation in getting part of our workforce generated by that job fair. And I presented that at the Santa Monica Mirror forum last week. So it's important for them that they engage in business, but they
Thank you,
engage in
Zoe.
civic.
Kevin.
Well, I've been a champion of this for a long time, and apparently some of it has worked. We have 2 young candidates here. We now have a Citizen Academy, which trains people how a city works and how they can excuse me, be more effective citizens. We also can use technology better. And that's what I do for a living. I'm the technology consultant for the local schools. So understanding how to use social media, how to make it easier for people to communicate with City Hall, to hear back from City Hall. I have a website, www.mckeown.net, that I've kept going the whole 16 years I'm on council. It's not a campaign website. It's a place for people to get information.
Thank you, Kevin. Nick.
Yeah, I think that this really speaks volumes and is one of the main pillars of the reason that I decided to run. And you know, we want to be reached out to. When I go to these Twilight concert series or I go to these movies on the beach, there are a lot of young people, and I was doing a lot of voter registration. And you know, I can tell you right now, the majority of my team and my volunteer base all come from Santa Monica College as well as Santa Monica High School, and they're all really excited. It's just making sure to reach out and include them and bring them into the process, because once we're educated, we want to take part of the process and we want to be part of that future, because a lot of these policies will affect us.
Thank you. So the 3 of you don't sense an indifference in the younger generation?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There's a big
And it's
difference.
not unique to this generation of younger people.
Yeah.
I lived here most of my life, but I moved here, I was 26, and my priorities were not City Hall. My priorities were work and women, frankly. You know? So I think that changes as people age.
As
I
you
think
get
also people come to appreciate how special Santa Monica is after they've lived here for a while. This is a town worth preserving.
Wait,
I just
Zoe,
wanna-
let Nick go.
I just want to say, I think that it's more of a systemic problem, specifically that campaigns, I've worked on other campaigns, systematically target high propensity voters. As youth, as a millennial, we are systematically not targeted and left out of the process because we just do not have the voting track record that people who are older tend to have. So what happens is a vicious feedback loop of candidates running, not reaching out to our generation, and then our generation in turn thinking, if they're not going to reach out to us, why should we take part of this process?
I think the voting track record is not there because we don't have a candidate in city council that represents them. So they cannot relate to the political process and they don't relate to the way the laws are being made. I was on Saturday on a Halloween hunt for my costume, and I was speaking to the people on the line, and one of the guys, who was a young guy, said, no, I'm not going to vote, because I was meeting voters and shaking hands. And he said, I'm not voting because it doesn't interest me, it doesn't represent me. And I think that once we put someone on city council that represents them, that they can relate to, they can use social media, and that changes the game, then we're going to have the voting track record.
I would say to young voters, whether millennials or Gen X or Gen Y, vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. And the decisions that the city makes now are going to affect you for more years than they're going to affect me or the other older voters. So please get involved. I would welcome your involvement.
Okay, I'd like to thank all of you, Kevin McKeown, Zoe Montaner, and Nick Bowles, for joining us tonight. Now let's take a look at our audience poll results. So let's bring them up on the board. All right. So a lot of you voted yes, SM, that you did believe that the strengthening of rent control. I'm sorry? No. Oh. That has had the unintended consequence of increasing the ellising of properties and tenant harassment. So that 60% of you, 20% said a little bit, somewhat. Nobody said no. Nobody said no change. Nobody said no altogether. And 20% said they didn't know for sure. So, okay, we're going to take a short break to change out groups and bring in our next group of candidates. When we come back, we'll be talking to John Mann, Sue Himmelrich, Whitney Scott Bain, and Terrence Later. Stay with us. Good job.